A day after Sri Lanka's President Gotabaya Rajapaksa fled his official residence in Colombo on Saturday, a ground report from the presidential palace shows that it has become a tourist spot. People can be seen milling around the compound as they wait for the official news of the president's resignation. People gathered at the site are being provided with food and water. Once the most guarded location in the country, the structure has now become a tourist spot. Placards with "Gotta go home" can be seen lying around as protesters refuse to leave till the president resigns. The president fled his official residence on Saturday, moments before thousands of protesters broke through police barricades and stormed the compound. Protesters across the country have been demanding the resignation of Gotabaya Rajapaksa amid the unprecedented economic crisis. Later, Speaker Mahinda Yapa Abeyavardena announced that Gotabaya will resign from the presidency on July 13. Earlier, videos had emerged of protesters taking dips in the swimming pool, working out at the presidential gym, and gorging on the food in the president's kitchen. Ranil Wickremesinghe Singh also announced that he is stepping down as Sri Lanka's Prime Minister to ensure the continuation of government, including the safety of all citizens. I accept the best recommendation of the party leaders today to make way for an all-party government. To facilitate this, I will resign as Prime Minister, PM Ranil Wickremesinghe Singh tweeted on Saturday. Sri Lankan Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe Singh was appointed as country's acting president after President Gotabaya Rajapaksa fled to Maldives on a military jet on Wednesday in the face of a public revolt against his government for mishandling the economy that has bankrupted the country. Parliament Speaker Mahinda Yapa Abeyavardena announced that President Rajapaksa has appointed Prime Minister Wickremesinghe Singh to act to perform his functions while he is abroad. This was under Article 37(1) of the Constitution, he said. Meanwhile, the protesters who had arrived in large numbers at the PM office have surrounded the building. The PM office had earlier corrected that a state of emergency would only be declared after his appointment as the acting president. The curfew, however, was in force. The Prime Minister has also ordered the security forces to arrest people acting in a riotous manner. President Rajapaksa, 73, left the country along with his wife and two security officers on a military jet. A brief statement from the Sri Lankan Air Force said, as the news of Rajapaksa's departure spread, an enthusiastic crowd gathered in Galley Face Green chanting the popular phrases, "Victory to the struggle, go home Gota." The police fired tear gases on protesters who had gathered near the PM office. The protesters broke through a barricade despite tear gas and stormed the Prime Minister's office, calling for his resignation. The protesters continue to occupy the three main buildings in the capital: the President's House, Presidential Secretariat, and Prime Minister's official residence, Temple Trees, calling for their resignations. The embassy reminded Chinese nationals not to participate in or watch any protest after hundreds of thousands of protesters stormed and occupied the presidential palace and set the Sri Lankan Prime Minister's private residence on fire in Colombo to demand the government take responsibility for mismanaging the nation's finances and for crippling food and fuel shortages faced by the country, the report added. The embassy also suggested that the Chinese nationals be vigilant, stay safe, avoid going out, keep communication open, and keep updated with the embassy's notices and reminders, it said. Hundreds of Chinese nationals reportedly work on various Chinese projects being built with millions of dollars of investment. These projects include Hambantota Port, which China has acquired for a 99-year lease as a debt swap, and the Colombo Port City project, which is being built on reclaimed land from the sea. China has provided a few million dollars of aid and recently sent a large shipment of rice, but for inexplicable reasons did not provide the large scale monetary assistance sought by President Rajapaksa or his brother, former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, and their pleas to defer repayment of Chinese loans. Following the economic crisis, Sri Lanka also defaulted on US dollar 51 billion in foreign debt, which included Chinese loans. Also, in a rare gesture, China last month commended India's efforts to assist Sri Lanka to deal with the worst financial crisis by providing over US dollar 3.5 billion in fuel and food assistance. Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, whose whereabouts is still unknown since the protesters stormed his official residence, has ordered officials to ensure the distribution of cooking gas after the fuel-starved country received 3,700 metric tons of LP gas, his office said on Sunday. President Rajapaksa had instructed the officers to carry out the unloading and distribution of gas as the first ship arrived at Keravalapitia. A second ship carrying 3,740 metric tons of gas is due on July 11, and a third carrying 3,200 metric tons of gas will arrive on July 15, according to the Sri Lankan media. In a new low in the continuously deteriorating situation in Sri Lanka, ambulance services have been temporarily suspended in 83 areas of the island nation due to fuel shortages. 1990 Suvaseria ambulance service will not be available due to the shortage of fuel. We kindly urge the public to refrain from calling 1990 requesting for the service, read a notice issued to the public from 1990 ambulance service. Moments before protesters stormed his official residence, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa fled from the scene. Protesters shouted, "Gota, go home," and demanded his resignation. Protesters also set fire to Prime Minister Ranil Wickramesingh's private residence. Gotabaya will resign from the presidency on July 13, while Ranil Wickremesinghe stepped down as Sri Lanka's Prime Minister on Saturday, July 10. Meanwhile, protesters continue to occupy President and Prime Minister's official residence. Sri Lanka is going through one of the worst economic crises that the country has witnessed. Sri Lanka's total foreign debt stands at USD 51 billion. Analysts say that economic mismanagement by successive governments has weakened Sri Lanka's public finances, leaving national expenditure in excess of income and the production of tradable goods and services at inadequate levels. The situation was exacerbated by deep tax cuts enacted by Rajapaksa government soon after it took office in 2019. Months later, the COVID-19 pandemic struck that wiped out much of Sri Lanka's revenue base, most notably from the lucrative tourism industry, while remittance from nationals working abroad dropped and were further sapped by an inflexible foreign exchange rate. Rating agencies concerned about government finances and its inability to repay large foreign debt downgraded Sri Lanka's credit rating from 2020 onwards, eventually locking the country out of international financial markets. To keep the economy afloat, the government leaned heavily on its foreign exchange reserves, eroding them by more than 70% in 2 years. The crisis has crippled Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was once seen as a model for a developing economy. Fuel shortages have led to long queues at filling stations as well as frequent blackouts, and hospitals have run short of medicine. Runaway inflation reached 54.6% last month and could rise to 70%, the central bank has said. To ease the suffering of people, Sri Lanka has entered negotiations with International Monetary Fund (IMF) to save the economy. IMF officials visited the capital Colombo between June 20 and 30 and held discussions with Sri Lankan officials on economic reforms and policies that could be supported by an IMF extended fund facility arrangement. Acknowledging that the negotiations with IMF to revive the country's collapsed economy were difficult, Vikrame Singh told Parliament the country was in talks as a bankrupt nation rather than a developing one, CNN reported. However, he said Sri Lanka will have to face a more difficult and complicated situation than previous negotiations now. Due to the state of bankruptcy our country is in, we have to submit a plan on our debt sustainability to IMF separately, the PM said. Once the IMF is satisfied with the plan, an agreement will be drawn at the staff level, he said, adding that this is not a straightforward process. Sri Lanka hoped to submit the report on debt restructuring and sustainability to the IMF by August. Once there is an agreement between IMF and Sri Lanka, a comprehensive loan assistance program would be prepared for a period of 4 years, the CNN report said. Last week, IMF had said more work was required to repair Sri Lanka's runaway fiscal deficit before any agreement is worked out. Sri Lanka needs to address its balance of payments crisis before IMF agrees on a fund agreement. Sri Lanka is in talks with India, Japan, and China to form an aid consortium amid ongoing talks with the IMF. Till now, India has provided around 3 billion US dollar worth of assistance to Sri Lanka, including a $400 million swap and credit lines totaling $1.5 billion. On Wednesday, Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa had tweeted that he had sought assistance from Russian President Vladimir Putin, asking him for an offer of credit support to import fuel. Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa on Thursday sent his resignation letter through an email to the parliament speaker, days after protesters stormed the presidential palace demanding his resignation. The speaker may now call a special session of parliament within the next 3 days. For the first time since 1978, Sri Lanka will elect the crisis hit country's next president through a secret vote by the MPs and not through a popular mandate, following the resignation of Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who was ousted by a popular uprising against him. Opposition leader Sajith Premadasa said he would be contesting for the post of president when nominations are called next week in parliament. Meanwhile, protests broke out in the Maldives after government allegedly harbored Rajapaksa. The protesters demanded that Maldives President Ibrahim Solih send Rajapaksa back to Sri Lanka. However, a Maldives government official said that Rajapaksa was only transiting there and would soon move on to a new destination. Security was boosted at the Maldives airport on Wednesday night. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa on Friday said he will not get intimidated or bullied into submission, even as the opposition party Economic Freedom Fighters announced that it would seek his impeachment in parliament. Ramaphosa, 69, has been under pressure in recent times over theft of foreign currency in his farm, frequent power outages across the country, surge in crime raids, and rising fuel prices. I will not be intimidated, distracted, nor bullied into submission, Ramaphosa said on Friday in his address at the closure of the centenary conference of the South African Communist Party. There have been calls for Ramaphosa to step down after he allegedly failed to report to police the theft of a huge amounts of foreign currency stolen from his farm. On Thursday, Economic Freedom Fighters EFF said during a media briefing that it was planning to approach other parties as well as ANC to support its motion of no confidence against Ramaphosa. We are not just looking for an ordinary motion of no confidence. We are calling for an impeachment. Cyril must leave with nothing because he has violated the people of South Africa, said EFF leader Julius Malema, who started the party some years ago after being ousted from the ANC, where he was the leader of the Youth League. Ramaphosa made no reference to this in his address but did share some details around the alleged non disclosure of the theft. Riding on a carefully built image of competency and confidence since entering the House of Commons in 2015, Rishi Sunak on Wednesday topped the first round of elections to decide the next leader of the ruling Conservative Party, who will take over as the next Prime Minister from Boris Johnson in September. Sunak, 42, remains the bookmakers' favorite to win the election. He polled 88 votes to top the list of candidates in the first round. Two candidates who got the least votes were eliminated from the race. Penny Mordaunt, a fast-rising favorite, polled the second highest number of votes, 67. It is widely expected in Westminster that Sunak, who resigned as the Chancellor last week, will be one of the last two candidates in the fray. The current round of elections, in which parties 358 MPs vote, is intended to decide the last two candidates. The second round will be held on Thursday. The final two candidates will be decided by July 21 through more rounds to eliminate those with the least votes. The winner among the last two candidates will be decided through postal votes by over 160,000 members of the party, a process that will take place in the coming months when the two candidates will address hustling around the country and engage in debates on live television. Twitter Inc. has hired US law firm Wachtell, Lipton, Rawson and Katz LLP as it prepares to sue Elon Musk and force him to complete the $44 billion acquisition of the social media company, according to people familiar with the matter. Musk, the chief executive officer of Tesla, on Friday terminated his deal, saying Twitter had failed to provide information about fake accounts on the platform, after which Twitter's chairman Brett Taylor vowed a legal fight. Twitter is planning to file a lawsuit early this week in Delaware. People familiar with the matter said Twitter declined to comment, while the law firm did not immediately respond to Reuters' request for comment outside business hours. Wachtell, Lipton, Rawson and Katz was one of the legal advisors for Musk's plan to take Tesla private in 2018. Musk tweeted that there was funding secured for a $72 billion deal to take Tesla private, but did not move ahead with an offer. Musk and Tesla each paid $20 million in civil fines, and Musk stepped down as Tesla's chairman to resolve US Securities and Exchange Commission claim that he defrauded investors. Statue of Mahatma Gandhi vandalized in Canada. India calls it hate crime. Google Doodle celebrates the deepest photo of universe taken by NASA's James Webb Space Telescope. Deforestation in Brazil's Amazon hits record. Angola's former president Eduardo dos Santos dies at 79. Novak Djokovic wins 7th Wimbledon title.